Hello and thanks for joining us from our studios in Israel. I'm Aaron Porras, here with ILTV's morning briefing.
Prime Minister Netanyahu has just arrived in Switzerland to attend the 4-day World Economic Forum. This is one of the biggest gatherings of foreign politicians, business heads, bankers, and even celebrities of the year, which aims to advance international cooperation between nations. It's also one of the biggest opportunities for foreign leaders to come face to face. Netanyahu has actually just met with both French President Emmanuel Macron and Spain's King Philippe VI. But bigger than the issue of money was the growing concern over the latest hiccup in Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. In response to President Trump's controversial decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital, several European nations are considering officially recognizing the Palestinian state. Slovenia says that they plan to do so in just a few weeks. Macron, however, says France will not recognize Palestine, at least not as a reaction to Trump's recognition. Netanyahu is actually scheduled to meet one-on-one with Trump later today at the forum, and the two plan to discuss proposed changes to the Iranian nuclear deal or even possible options for nixing it altogether. Some of the top NGOs and aid groups in the world have now come together, urging the United States to reverse its budget cuts to the Palestinians. The Trump administration has already dropped over half of its funding to the UN's Agency for Palestinian Refugees, UNRWA. But apparently, the White House is considering slashing even more, potentially even everything. Executives from Save the Children, Care USA, Refugees International, and over a dozen other aid groups say that the budget cuts dramatically endanger lives, disrupting food, healthcare, and education to Palestinian refugees all over the world. The letter accuses the United States of cutting this aid not based on humanitarian concern, but because it's seemingly meant to collectively punish the Palestinians for refusing to negotiate with the United States leaders in the peace process. Palestinian leaders, however, argue that they only withdrew from the negotiating table because of President Trump's controversial Jerusalem decision. They argue that it makes no sense why Palestinians should be punished for a choice President Trump himself made. An unconfirmed Israeli report, however, says that the Palestinian leaders have just purchased a $50 million private jet for PA President Mahmoud Abbas. That's a staggering price tag considering the concern over these budget cuts. And if true, this report would indicate a very troubling attitude in Palestinian leadership during a time when they claim that their own people are starving. But many still argue that the UN's Refugee Agency for Palestinians is one of the only life rafts for hundreds of thousands of Palestinians all over the world. While Israeli ambassador to the UN in Geneva, Aviva Raz-Shechter, levies heavy criticisms against the UN for their anti-Israel bias, members of the UN are again criticizing Israel. During the periodic regular review of Israel's human rights record, South Africa's diplomat Clinton Swemmer said Israel is, quote, the only state in the world that can be called an apartheid state, and that South Africa remains, quote, deeply concerned at the denial of the right of self-determination to the Palestinian people, end quote. Swemmer continued to then suggest that to solve this issue, Israel must halt all settlement construction, address racism against Africans in Israel, desist from abusing human rights defenders, and cease, quote, the arbitrary detention of children, end quote. The UNHRC's Universal Periodic Review is meant to allow member states to comment on, question, and make recommendations about each other's human rights records. But most countries that took the podium attacked Israel. Aside from Shechter, other Israeli diplomats also took to the floor to respond to these wild accusations, saying things like how the, quote, baseless allegation is not only false but also illegitimate, and that, quote, it's deplorable that countries like South Africa took advantage of this forum to throw baseless politicized allegations against Israel, missing the opportunity to contribute to the discussion in any meaningful way, end quote. Two new versions of a bill allowing Israel to hold onto the bodies of terrorists have now passed the first reading in the Knesset. In recent years, Palestinian terrorists' funerals have become more akin to parades that both praise and encourage further violent attacks. In light of this, Israeli officials have suggested temporarily withholding the bodies of terrorists. But when the High Court said that this could not be done without legal precedent, the bills explicitly permitting this action were drafted. The versions were authored by Jewish Home MK Bezalel Smotrich and Likud MK Anat Berko, respectively. And though the differences between the two bills is not yet known, the general idea is, if passed, the new law would allow the police to set conditions regarding the funeral if the police district commander feared that the funeral might lead to further incitement or violence. Such conditions include the size, location, time, and attendance of the funeral, and the police would be allowed to hold back the body until the family agrees to the terms. The bills passed 62 to 21 with 3 abstentions. It now has to pass 2 more readings before becoming law.
That's all for now. I'm Aaron Porras, and see you later with our main daily broadcast from Israel at 2 p.m. Eastern Time.